Today, we stop in our tracks for this conversation with a Black man. A man who has been in my life for over 20 years and impacted it in ways that continue to unfold. Steve Anderson was born in Louisville, Kentucky in the 60s, which is considered one of the most dangerous cities on earth. When his dad was shot by his supposed friend when he was 9 years old, anger smoldered within him. How could my mom not press charges? How could the man shot in the mouth live and my dad shot in the leg die? So many inbuilt experiences of growing up Black permeated his body before he moved to LA to start his life on his own at 21. But quickly, he began his decade-long navigation of the globe, starting in none other than Switzerland. Picked up by two budding beach volleyballers from Australia, he would move to Perth to execute the dream of winning Olympic medals, which he did with a bronze in '96 and a gold in 2000 with Nat Cook and Kerri Pottharst. Marrying his Swiss Aussie wife in 2000, he remained Nat's coach for 16 years. During that time, he would head up coaching programs in Bali and Vanuatu and leave legacies for athletes and organizations in those countries over the next 10 years. My Canadian beach team would rise to our best ever world finish of 7th place under his guidance. And the things I learned with this man can only be described as Zen tutelage. Steve became instrumental in my life for being able to ask and express things that sometimes it felt like there was no one else to really be comfortable asking. My mom married my Black dad in 1973 when interracial marriage was only legalized in the US in '67. That's 6 years prior. And many family members refused to come to that wedding. My mom and dad hailed from one of the most racially charged cities in Canada, being on the Atlantic coast where many slave boats dropped off cargo. And I say it like that because that's how it was back then. That's how it was viewed in the 1800s. But we're heading down to US cities where we hear a lot more about slavery. There's even a city in Atlantic Canada called Africville because of its dense population of Blacks. My name of Maxwell, so Sarah Maxwell, is actually Scottish, but I'm not Scottish because my great-great-great-grandfather was a cook. Him and his twin brother were cooks on a ship where every Black took the name Maxwell. Get that? That's weird. That just, I don't even know where to place that. So back to Steve. In 2013, Steve left to head up the whole of Team Canada Beach Volleyball with his now 5-year-old son and soon-to-be wife, Alicia. He would lead the country to #1 in the world within a short 2-year period. Recently, he was asked by his suburb, aptly named The Beaches in Toronto, to give the speech for their Black Lives Matter march. I've asked him if he'd be willing to share that with us all today before we begin to open up this dialogue, which I'm calling the uncomfortable conversations with a Black global citizen. So Steve, thank you for being here and being willing to read this and share this with our community.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. It's thick already. It's very thick already. So thank you for having me here, and thank you for the privilege of reading this. This took me a long time to be able to voice. Not a long time to write, but a long time to say. So thank you for creating this. You know, my personal mission is to create a world of love, peace, and prosperity by sharing my truths, my vulnerability, and my gifts. But I haven't been living up to my mission. I've been focused on trying to provide for my family and make sure that we're protected. But in my heart of hearts, I know that no matter what I do, because of the color of my skin, we are not protected. Every time I'm driving down the street and a police officer pulls up behind me, I expect to be pulled over. My son, who's been called the N-word just down the street from here, already knows that people he has never met will judge him because of the color of his skin. And even though we live here in Canada, I still have to have the conversation that every Black parent dreads having with their child and tell him how dangerous it is to be a Black person in this world. I've been quiet for too long, hoping that we'll figure it out and our day will come. But that day is not coming by itself. We have to step up, put in the work, and speak out. So I wrote this because I didn't want to get caught up in my emotions and miss something that I thought was important to say. In 1883, Emma Lazarus said, "Until we are free, we are none of us free." And in 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "No one of us is free until we're all free." And today, in 2020, we're still having the same conversation. None of us are free until we're all free. We're not free from the hate of racism. We're not free from the shame of racism, master and slave alike. I was born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1964. I grew up in Kentucky, and I know racism well. America's on fire right now, but it's not just America who hates and feels shame. We all recognize this pain. According to the Ontario Human Rights Commission, Black people in Toronto are 20 times more likely to be shot by police than white people. That's here in Canada. Racism lives all over the world, and it has moved from our systems into our subconscious. We have to acknowledge it and resolve it so that we can move forward. I want to say that again. We have to acknowledge it and resolve it so that we can move forward. Is there one person here today that can honestly say that you don't have secret thoughts of hate, fear, or superiority over another group of people based on their race, their gender, their sexual orientation, their weight, their education, religion, or some other characteristic that makes them different from you? I can't say it. The hate, fear, and shame is killing us. It's killing us all. So thank you for being here and being part of this Black conversation. Not because you understand and empathize with Black people, but because you can't tolerate a world where Black lives don't matter. Some of you might think that this should be an all life matters conversation. And you won't understand why your Black friend gets angry with you or even calls you a racist for changing the conversation. They're angry because it disrespects and diminishes Black people in this specific Black conversation to shift the focus to something more palatable or relatable and away from the raw and the brutal truth. Black men, women, and children are being murdered by police and other people because of the color of their skin and because of systematic racism and not being valued as human beings. Racism can never be changed if we never address it directly. So the next time that you're tempted to shift the conversation to all lives matters or doesn't my life matter too, pause. This time the conversation is about Black people. The next time it could be about you, about women, about children, Indigenous people, brown people, Asian people, white people, sexual orientation, religion, the planet, animals, wherever you feel your pain. Everyone will get the opportunity to be the target of fear, ignorance, and hate. Everyone has had the opportunity to be the target of fear, ignorance, and hate. Some more than others, but everyone's time has come and it will come again. And when your time comes, Black people will be ready to stand with you, to honor your conversation, to respect that we don't know what it must be like for you, but we refuse to live in a world that uses hate, fear, ignorance, and violence to oppress you. We're not free until all of us are free. Use your voice, your vote, and your dollars. Stand up against hate, fear, and inequality, oppression, and injustice. Let's stand together and abolish all forms of slavery and injustice. Racial injustice, educational injustice, economic injustice, social injustice, all forms of injustice. And as Dr. King said, injustice anywhere is a threat everywhere. Mm. We're caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Thank you. God bless.
Thank you, Steve, for that. I don't know how other people feel. Sometimes you don't understand your emotion, you know, you just got it. It's just happening. So thank you for that. I feel like it's been a long time coming to be having this conversation. And I heard something that I just want to address, that beautiful thing that you said about trying to shift the conversation when it's about Black Lives Matter. That's the conversation we're in right now.
That's right.
And I heard something really beautiful, because we are in a time of COVID-19 as well. And because we are now focused on COVID-19, because it's the current threat that we are experiencing on the globe, it doesn't mean that cancer isn't huge. It doesn't mean that other kinds of viruses are killing people. It doesn't mean that. It just means that right here, right now, this is the imminent conversation.
That's right.
And I really thought that that could really help people with this, to like navigate what you just said in a way that everybody kind of gets that we're in the COVID-19 conversation, and we're not really trying to shift that one. We get that that one actually, and I really believe that one injustice being unwound will actually begin to pull away at a lot of the others. So thank you, Steve. I'd love to ask you questions that, it was funny, I was of two minds, right? Because I'm like, I hear this all the time, and I want to just ask questions for the things that I hear in the world. So I just want to acknowledge the privilege of looking the way that I do. So even though I have two kinds of blood in my body, I look really white. If anything, I look really tanned, and I get that every day. Why are you so tan? So I have, you know, an experience of explaining why I'm tan, but ultimately I don't experience what you do, Steve. And I've learned so much from you being open to sharing that with me. I've heard it expressed that, you know, and this I could actually relate to, and so I'm going to say it here for others, is that it's like the experience of being molested, and that has an impact. Any child or person who's ever had any kind of molestation knows that the moment that it happens, there's an impact. But then when you go to tell someone and they don't believe you, it's like re-victim, like it's happening all over again, you know?
That's right.
And it's like to see white people and Black people and Mexican people and Asian people, everybody like marching together. It's like people actually believing you. Like you going to your mom, and your mom saying, you know, all those years ago when you told me, like, now I believe you. And so I just want to, you know, share that with you, and try to have people kind of grasp things from their level. But in the same way, I want to clarify my own privilege and my own constant look at where am I making generalized opinions about people without knowing them. Like for me, that's where I really realize the moment I know someone, or I know, like I have understanding and I'm in there, everything changes. But I too have things come up for me in so many different ways, whether it's race, and thank you for addressing so many different categories of people. Like there's ironies to the fact that I'm married to a woman, because I had plenty of thoughts about women with women in the past. And now I just laugh. I'm like, oh my gosh, why do people keep telling me about their gay friends? I was like, why are they telling me that? And then I go, oh my God, they think I'm that because I'm married to a woman for 20 years. So anyway, all that to say, I'm not shifting that conversation. It's just use your own experiences to just for a moment begin to step into what Steve's here to share. So Steve, we just got to cover off a couple things right now, if you're cool with it. What issue of humanity is at play right now? Like, you know, when you say we aren't free until everyone is free, what do you really think the issue is for humanity right now?
This is such a moment of opportunity like I haven't experienced before. So, I mean, the first time I heard Black Lives Matters as a conversation, you heard it dismissed as, well, doesn't, you know, all lives matter? Why just Black lives? What about me? And what about these people? And that's not what I'm hearing now. What I'm hearing now is people who are not of color saying, I refuse to live in a world where Black lives don't matter. Not trying to shift the conversation. And if you look, when I was looking at the rallies, and my wife and we were watching it on television from Canada, and we're like, aren't there a lot of white people out there in these protests? Like, yeah, there's a lot of white people. And it boggled my mind for a little bit, because I'm like, this is not what I'm used to seeing. And these people are angry, and it looks personal. And it's not because they're Black or they're trying to empathize with the Black experience. It looks to me like they're saying, no, this is systemic. I recognize this. I'm not putting up with this crap anymore. I'm not leaving this world for my kids. It's not the world I want to live in. This is not the world that I want to build for my kids. Black lives do matter. I'm not Black, but I'm here to say Black lives matters. I'm not living in a world where it doesn't. And change needs to happen. We're right on the cusp of change. Now the question is, how do we actually get that change to happen? How do we actually get, how do we team up and use our power to get change? And this is where privilege comes back in it for me. You change usually from a place of privilege. You have a vote. Not every place on the planet recognizes voting. So if you live in a place where you can vote and you actually have a say, that's privilege and power. I grew up in America. I have privilege because of the place that I grew up. I have privilege because I'm a man, and men get certain privileges. I have privilege because I have running water in my house. And when I was in Vanuatu, they didn't have electricity or running water in their house, even though they had a 5-star hotel down the road. There's privileges that we all enjoy, and we all have the opportunity to influence our environment and our outcomes if we step into that privilege powerfully. And
but
you heard a lot of—
Steve, would you say that this conversation, I just want to make sure everyone's woken up, because this is being recorded from my end from Australia, you're in Canada. Does this Black Lives Matter conversation of what we're talking about involve more than just the US?
Yeah, this is the paradox of this whole situation and the conversation. The conversation right now today is Black Lives Matters. Now, if you're a Black person, you're inside the conversation because you're the one at risk. This directly involves you. If you're not a person of color, you're in the conversation because are you going to live in a world where Black lives don't matter? You're not removed from the conversation. You just have a different place in the conversation. Okay. And you hear people talk about allies and all this sort of stuff. And when you look it up in the dictionary, it's accurate. But I much prefer that we're all human family. We're not the same. We need to celebrate our uniqueness and our differences and educate each other on our uniquenesses and our differences, and celebrate each other instead of being afraid of each other because of our differences. And when we can celebrate each other, then we won't be afraid of this person looks different than me, or this person thinks different than me. We'll actually learn from it and grow. And even if we don't agree, we'll expand our own perspective. That's a way more powerful world to live in than I can't stand next to you because I'm afraid you're going to take something from me. I'm in competition with you. So yeah, this is a global conversation. And when you look at, there are places that don't have any Black history of slavery or colonialism that have racism against Black people. which
Right.
is really
Like
interesting.
what would some of our white friends, because what would some of our white friends be surprised to know that happens to you on a regular basis in Toronto, living in Brisbane, Australia, growing up in Louisville, Kentucky, staying in five-star hotels in the mountains of Switzerland, trying to get to your posh hotel in Rio de Janeiro, wondering
Right.
why the Japanese were staring at you in Tokyo or the Chinese in Shanghai. Like, what are some of the varying experiences that you've had of being we're calling you a global black man?
Global black. It's interesting because you brought up the stat, only 15% of Americans have passports. And my question is, well, how many of those are black people?
Yeah, and we got to get that stat because I
Yeah,
can't, I'm going to get that. So
yeah.
talk to us about it.
I've been so fortunate to travel the world and the world tour and how many countries that you go to and it was really interesting for me. This would have been in the late 80s, maybe early 90s, late 80s, or sorry, late 80s, early 90s. We're staying in Brazil, and I love Brazil. And I really had to get clear on Brazil, being a black man in Brazil, because there is some serious treatment people of color in Brazil when I was there in the 80s and 90s. And I've been back since. It shifted. I was a tourist, so I don't know how much it shifted. I'm gonna tell you my story. We'll see how much it shifted. But it was really interesting. And a friend of mine put it in perspective to me as a Brazilian. But my story is that, I'm traveling the world with beach volleyball. I was coaching, Natalie Cook and Kerri Pottharst. We're in Brazil, and we used to go to Brazil maybe 3 or 4 times a year when they were having that many tournaments. And as part of the tour, you stay at 4 and 5-star hotels, and usually close to the beach where you're going to be, playing. So I'm staying at 4 or 5-star hotel, and we're going out to practice, and we're going out in our shorts, and it's hot. The girls come back, they're in their bikinis or shorts. I come back, I'm in my shorts and a t-shirt. I'm covered, it's in sand. And every day, I got stopped by the security trying to speak Portuguese to me, to see if I'm a local. I'm like, you had this conversation yesterday. I'm staying here. Here's my key. I'm American. I'm not even Brazilian, man. What are you doing? It was really interesting to me. And so I thought, oh, Brazil is so racist. This was my opinion. And talking to a Brazilian, it was really interesting how they put it in perspective to me. It was about class. Race was a part of it. Because if you look at the Dutch lineage and how Brazil was formed, you had white people who were in the plantations inside celebrating. You had the black people who were from slave lineage celebrating Carnival, and they all came out and came out of the plantations and started to mix together. And Brazilians consider themselves to be Brazilian. But if you're dark skinned, you're assumed to have come from slave lineage, from poverty, no education. So the color of your skin is some indicator of your status in life. And on the flip side of it, the lighter you are, blue eyes, blonde hair, the more you have, towards your Dutch lineage or whatever other white lineage there was in Portuguese, whatever was going on in Brazil. And so that shifted the conversation for me from the slave conversation I knew in America, where it was just straight up, you black, you're not worthy.
Okay, I have a question in here. I was going to ask it in a different way, but this has directly happened to me weeks ago. My Brazilian friend says to me, "Why do you always talk about color, Sarah? I don't see color. I'm from Brazil. I don't see color." And I don't know why that evoked this thing that I hear a lot when people tell me they're colorblind.
Right.
That are not Brazilian. Okay. But this came up recently.
Right.
Where this very fair Brazilian with curly blonde hair told me that they don't see color. I've never actually had a dark skinned Brazilian ever say that to me, ironically. So Steve, talk to me about colorblind. Why does it irritate me? I don't even know why. It bugs me.
Yeah.
All hell.
Well,
but
first of all, because I doubt it's true.
Like
even within our color, we're not colorblind.
Exactly. Look at
whether
me.
you're white, black, or whatever. Exactly. So if you're white, you're looking, well, do you have dark hair or blonde hair, light hair? Do you have light eyes, dark? Even within a black, say, or do you have good hair? Or you have light skin? Even within our own race and color, we're not colorblind. So thinking that you're colorblind to another race, I'm not going to say it's impossible. I'm going to say probably not likely. Probably not likely. But, and I had a story for this, and it was really interesting. When I was a kid, I was probably 18 years old, maybe, 17, 18 years old. And I played volleyball in Kentucky, and I played in the white league. And oftentimes I was either only black guy in the gym. I was the only black guy on my team for a long time. And then other black men started to play in those leagues in the white neighborhoods. And one year we went to the home of the Grand Dragon of the Ku Klux Klan in Kentucky. And there was a tournament there. And I want to go play. I'm going to go play with my team. I'm not going to be stopped. And I'm young and crazy, right? And we had to drive there. And I lived in Louisville. This was I can't remember the name of the place, but the last two, and this is back again would have been in the 80s. The last two Grand Dragons of the Ku Klux Klan had come from this place. And they had run all the black people out. And here I was going to go play volleyball in this town. And so we're driving there, and we're in a packed car. There was, 6 of us in the car. And a really good friend of mine and mentor, Jack Gallagher, was driving. And nothing but love for him and nothing but love for me. It was a great mentor for me. And we're driving, and the race conversation is happening. And Jack, was ex-Marine, is just like, Steve, man, we got your back. We love you. We don't see color. And, you're just our brother. And, and we got your back. If anything happens, we're going to be right there in front of you and everything. Your color doesn't matter to us. And I'm sitting in the back at this time, and I'm thinking, because Jack's driving, I'm like, I believe you. And I said it. I'm like, Jack, I believe you. I know that you see me as Steve. And I know that color is not an issue for you on an everyday basis. But if I was dating your daughter, would I still be Steve? Or would I be Steve, the black guy, dating your daughter? And he got quiet. And he answered in a very humble voice. He goes, yeah, you're right. For whatever reasons, fear of how you'd be treated or whatever, you'd be Steve, the black guy dating my daughter. It's like, yeah, I know you love me, man. I know you jump in front of a bullet and all that sort of stuff. I get all that. But you can't say that race doesn't matter. It does matter. We got to stop trying to be gray and pretending like race doesn't matter, like God made a mistake. God did not make a mistake. The human race is all sorts of shades, all sorts of culture, all sorts of language. We're that way. It's not a mistake. If we can just celebrate each other, and instead of trying to, change each other or say that we're all the same, we're not all the same. Let's learn from each other. Let's celebrate each other and together. Then we might get somewhere. But as long as we keep trying to avoid this conversation and say things like race doesn't matter, I understand that you don't think of yourself as a racist. I understand that you don't judge that person based on their race that you're aware of. I understand all that. But race does matter. And if we celebrate it, it can become an empowering thing instead of a disempowering thing.
Did it like negate you in some way? Like your experience of life when he was like, oh, you're just Steve. Like, does it negate like the unique differences that are you have different experiences of the exact same places. I was there with you. You and I have different experiences because of how you look and how I look. So is that it? Like there was something in that I was like, wow, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I didn't process it as being negated. And one of the reasons why I grew up in Kentucky, I had, I'm part redneck, which I didn't know till I moved to LA, and what I mean by that is I moved out to LA. Now I was used to the Ku Klux Klan marching down Dixie Highway every year on Martin Luther King's birthday to protest Martin Luther King's birthday. This was my norm growing up in Kentucky in the 70s and 80s. And so when I moved to LA, Martin Luther King's birthday, I'm like, well, where's the Klan marching? Because in Kentucky, sometimes we go out and look at it, and you could almost to like have popcorn. We didn't, but it was like watching a spectacle.
Yeah. Okay.
Because it was just so normalized as part of our life experience. And when I got to LA and I'm like, well, where's the Klan? They looked at me like, what's wrong with you? Boy, ain't nobody, the Klan would try to march down the street here in LA. They get lit up. And I was like, that's such a redneck, normal, like normality, normal, way of looking at life. Look at what my subconscious is from growing up in this, what I accept as normal. And this, but I didn't realize before, but racism and discrimination could be subconscious as much as conscious. And that's where it really gets us, is our subconscious biases and how we, people because of their weight or sexual orientation or gender, where they come from, their education. It's all these subconscious things that we use to judge and categorize people and make ourselves superior or not. And the last piece to that is, I said before, the shame belongs to the master as much as the slave. And there's a lot of shame. And there's a lot of shame with white people who are experiencing the privilege of their forefathers, and I think it takes a lot of courage to stand up right now, if you're a white person, especially, white male especially, and say, I know I'm in a position of privilege and I choose not to exert it in a way where it disadvantages other people. I want a fair, just world, even though I'm benefiting from it.
Can I speak to that a little for a sec? Because
Yeah.
I heard someone say what you just said about shame. There's a choice to embody the ancestry that did something wrong. Like you embody the shame and that ancestry. But what about the part of your history that was an abolitionist, and you can find them. They were there somewhere in your lineage.
Yeah.
And I think no matter where you live, like embody that person instead of, because they're both present. But I think the shame comes from, I can't change it. It happened, that's shame from a past that isn't really taking any actions into the future. But an abolitionist, the kind of person, the kind of people that helped with the Underground Railroad, or the kind of people who were in Germany and helping Jewish people, like different experiences. These are the abolitionists of your time. We all have that in our blood too.
Well, and the really interesting part is how you can be the abolitionist now. So
That's right.
you change your family tree. Because let's say that all of your education and life experience up until this point included racism, classism, all the isms, right? And you consciously know that you benefit from it. And whether maybe you are ashamed and maybe you're not ashamed, maybe you're just enjoying the benefits of it. But being able to, again, recognize this is my privilege, just like I have the privilege of running water in my home, and not everybody has that privilege. Just recognizing this is my privilege, and then having the courage to say, I'm not going to use this privilege in a way that's going to disadvantage someone else or is going to harm someone else. I draw the line today, the way white people are drawing the line right now, Black people, everybody's drawing the line right now saying, I will not live in this world where these other brothers and sisters of mine, my cousins, are being treated this way. I won't live in that world. I won't use my privilege to keep perpetuating this world. I won't use my silence to keep perpetuating this world. I'm going to speak up and take action. So I think that's the real opportunity. And the flip side of it is, as Black people and Black Americans, I think we have a very unique situation. It may be this way other places, but I grew up in America. And one thing I came to realize is I'm both slave and slave master. Because I don't know of Black people who have any sort of long-term history, lineage in the States who don't have some sort of white blood in them. And my grandmother was Irish and Cherokee Indian. My grandfather's father was a slave owner. That's where my name Anderson comes from. But he didn't claim him as his son, even though he educated him, because he wouldn't have anyone with his blood who was uneducated, but never claimed him as a son. I don't know any of the white people in my family because there's no connection. But that's there. In my DNA is the DNA of the master and the DNA of the slave. Now grow up in that situation where the arrogance of the master and the shame and being beaten down of the slave coming together. And I think that's the strength and the power and the uniqueness you see in a lot of Black Americans is we got this, you know, and today, like I'm born in the 60s, I come from a different space. Young people now, Black people can own their Blackness. You see them in the corporate world, tattoos, hair, the whole thing, earrings, whatever. When I was growing up, it was a hard decision that people thought, Black people thought, and I thought this myself, do I have to try to emulate a white male to make it in corporate America? Is there a glass ceiling on me if I show my ethnicity? And can I be my authentic self and have wealth and status and achievement in this place? Or do I have to model something that isn't me? And I think, like I said, young people can show up their authentic self now and be accepted in the business world based on what they can produce. Mm. Before, there are all sorts of glass ceilings. I don't care how good you were, because of the color of your skin or because of the way you spoke or your education or how you looked, you weren't gonna rise above it. You just were not gonna be welcomed into the club. So it's a very unique situation. And I think the shame lives on both sides, being the survivor of that treatment, you know, and being here and having to look your women and your children as a Black man, look them in the eye. And as the survivor of this system that's still oppressing, there's a shame that goes with that.
Absolutely. And I want to ask you, like, these are not surface level questions, but I want to give people just little access to things that come up for people a lot. And it's, should people be saying Black or African American? So firstly, people get really tied up when they don't know what to say to me because they're like, oh, she's Canadian, African American, what?
Yeah.
So, and you're married to a Jamaican woman. So talk to me a little bit about Black or African American.
Right. So my personal opinion is it depends on your era.
Okay.
I come from the I'm Black and I'm proud era. So I say Black. When African American came about, I was like, you know, that's more politically correct. And that's a more, I don't know if it's a more accurate term. I don't know that all Black people come, you know, everybody comes from Africa, but some people would identify as coming from the West Indies and what's going on. I don't know. So I personally say Black. Have used African American. But I think depending on your, you know, people of color, I think depending on your era, you know, like whatever your heritage is, if you tell me what your heritage is, then that's what I'm gonna say to you. And if you say that it's pronounced this way and not that way, then that's the way I'm gonna pronounce it for you. So I think it's a really difficult situation. I don't think there's one term that's gonna cover.
That'll free people up around the wording, but you know, in Australia at the moment, Aboriginal people have claimed First Nations, you know, as a name. And I know that there's also a real connection to Black Lives Matter. And so they consider themselves Black and that Black Lives Matter. And just as a little aside, not to shift the conversation, but every Aussie should watch the movie American Dream. If you want a little bit of a status check on what's going on in the country from a different perspective. It was really powerful, very emotional movie, true story, an autobiography of a infamous athlete here in Australia. But again, around this word Black. So thank you for kind of that description of your experience of it. So talk to me a little bit about the N-word, okay? So this is where Nat gets really like, not just Nat, you know, she asks me all the time, I don't understand. Why can Black people say the N-word? And I think I've heard it the most in Australia. And I can't even breathe, right? Because me, it's like, oh, that can't pass over your lips. It's never passed over mine. How could they just say it so easily? Talk to me a little bit about the N-word and why Blacks have reclaimed it.
Wow, I'm starting to revisit because I totally get that, and I've used the word and variations of it with an A on the end and all that kind of stuff. And I'm revisiting this one. I really am, because this is what we did. We used to have a record. My nephew and I owned a record label. It's called E-Pod Records, which is dope spelled backwards. We did that for a reason. We did it because we wanted to take something that's used to disempower people and the lifestyle, the attraction of it. We said, okay, well, get that lifestyle and attraction, but do it in a way that empowers your life instead of sending you to prison or kills you early. So we flipped it. And our symbol was the Confederate flag in every color except for its true colors. And our motto was the South, they say the South shall rise again. We said the South has risen, it just has a different color face. So that was us trying to reclaim these negative images and brands and try to empower them by flipping them. The way people flip religion and all these things that are meant to empower people and have been used to cause war and everything else. That was my mentality for a long time. And now it goes back to Black, where Black is a man-made construct. Black was a construct that was created to help the Spanish figure out who they should be killing, who weren't Christians. You go do some research on where Black comes from. You couldn't use ethnicity, which is different from race, to distinguish people. What's a Muslim look like? What's a Christian look like? What color are they? What language do they speak? So you can't really justify killing all Muslims based on their color or whatever. You can't even identify them that way. What are Jewish people? Black Jewish people. What do Jewish people look like? You can't identify them that way. So, but race, classifying someone as Black, classifying someone as white, you can see that. And so it's really interesting because I grew up in America and I grew up at a time where I'm Black and I'm proud. Black is something that I embrace. I don't know if that's right or not, but it's something that I embrace. And I embrace it because it's like the phoenix rising up. And everything that Black people have been through in America, you are Black man strong and Black woman strong if you can stand up today, love yourself, aspire to something, and make a contribution to the world. That's Black man and Black woman strong. So
what do you say to Kingston, your son, when somebody calls him the N-word though? Like, how did you, like you said, I know for you it's transitioning here, but what was that conversation like when he came home?
My son's a very emotional, beautiful young man. Angry, just born angry. That fire in his belly that makes him want to go out and do something, which I really appreciate. I don't want to take it away from him. And there is nothing. I said a bunch of stuff, and there is nothing you can say to a child when someone has used something that is them. Like, you're not going to change the color of your skin. I mean, there's products to try to do that and everything else, but I identify, this is my brown skin. And for someone to use a term like that, that's only for people with brown skin. Now it starts this conversation in your head. What are they saying to me? Are they saying that I have no value? You talked about cargo before. Are they saying that I'm not worthy of love, worthy of being seen, being heard? What are they saying that's unique to me? And as a kid trying to figure that out, I mean, that's not a conversation for a kid to have on their own at night in their own bed when they're trying to figure out their own self-worth and everything else. So I said lots to him. And, you know, one of the things that sticks out to me is, you know, the challenges make the champion. And I try to talk to him in a way where he can see it as an opportunity to be empowered and give people their own hate. Let them have their own hate. And I try to be rational, which is stupid and doesn't make any sense, and say, you know, things like, you know, we all have prejudices and all this sort of stuff and biases. And, you know, I'm biased against this and you might have a bias, and it's just our ignorance. All this stuff, what does it mean to a kid? Doesn't mean anything to a kid. I don't know how it's going to affect him. He may never consciously know how it's going to affect him. All I know is that it happened. And now it's part of his life.
And I'm just going to go out on a limb for the kid who says it. People do a lot, they catch a lot more than they're taught. So when you're talking about responsibility, like taking responsibility for us, I think part of that is that kid isn't fully responsible around that comment. Like, people are making racial slurs all the time, like kids throw things at other kids, different ones. You know, in Australia, there's lots of Italian slurs being made, or Asian slurs being made. And I would just say that's part of this whole systemic not taking responsibility thing. And then the kid comes out with it.
Right.
And I would actually say that's just another version of not being responsible. Meaning that kid doesn't even, there's no kind of understanding. There's no relationship to it, I would say. They really don't get it fully.
Yeah, and the whole conversation's a paradox in that, I mean, you can't say to someone, because of the color of your skin, you can't say that. I can say it. I can say it in your presence, but you cannot. I can even call you the word, but you can't call me back. Yeah. So that doesn't make any sense.
That's that's hard for people. I will say that for all, like, Oprah is really big. She's not happy about this. I know she speaks really openly. It's really confusing for people. I've never done it, but imagine me. That would look really dicey, wouldn't it? You know, so I just won't for my own self. But look, I just think when people are, especially now when people are trying to understand things, that does confuse it. Because I don't think we've given a definitive answer. I'll just say that, let's just say everybody's a little bit working on this one. Working on. So talk to me about protesting. Like, most people go, I can understand protesting, but why rioting?
Oh, okay. I love this one. I'm going to talk about. But before we go there, I just I'd like to see with the N word.
Yeah.
I'd like to see the version with the ER used when it's appropriate. And so it's used appropriately to people who are violent and roguish, have with nothing to do with skin color. So I think what's happened, it's been taken out of the context of its true meaning and been given to Black people. And it's not in common use for people who deserve the term. So if it was removed, if race was removed from the term and it was reassigned to the dictionary as its true meaning, and there'd be people all over the world of many different races where that term would fit and it would have nothing to do with race. So I think the fact that it's associated with having, you know, brown skin or having Black blood, you know, we keep it as this taboo thing, you know. So, but if we give it back to what it was and stop claiming it, it would be really interesting. It would be really interesting, and I wouldn't take it personally because it would have nothing to do with me.
Yeah.
So that's just something interesting I'd like to see. If it's going to be used, then use it appropriately and take the color out of it, because there's nothing to do with color.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And by the way, if people are like, stop interrupting him, I want to hear about him, because I know my mom might be thinking that, but I'll tell you, I'm trying to get a lot in a short amount of time.
Yeah.
So protesting, yes. Why rioting? And
Yeah.
why would blacks
Yeah.
destroy their own neighborhood? If I haven't heard that every time. So talk to us about that.
Yeah. So this one baffled me, and just the other day, it just something came to me, and I was like, oh wow, that makes lots of sense. I was in LA during the Rodney King incident and the protests and all the stuff that happened in the neighborhoods and everything. It was wow, it was incredible, and this reminded me of that. Um, and the question came up for me again: is like, why do black people why do we tear up our own neighborhoods? And then I thought, well, what would it look like if a bunch of black people jumped on buses and went to white neighborhoods and started setting things on fire and looting and all that kind of stuff? They'd be shot on sight. Like, what do you think would really happen? What do you think the police, what do you think the news would say? What do you think the people in those neighborhoods would say? And how do you think those people would be treated?
Mm.
It would not be the way they're left alone a lot to tear up their own neighborhoods. And black people will say, well, we don't own those stores. We don't own those stores. Those stores are owned by people who don't live here or people of different race or whatever. So we're not tearing up our stuff. We're tearing up their stuff. Now those people service those neighborhoods. That's a whole different debate about whether they're taking that money out of the black community, because dollars don't stay in the black community more than like 4 hours. Other races keep their money in their community, some up to like 60 days. They'll trade amongst their own race. And black money, 4 to 6 hours, is in our hands and out of the community and given to someone of another race out of that neighborhood, which is really interesting. So,
but can I interrupt to say that for me, people are giving way too much, like frustration and anger is not that logical. It's not that premeditated, in that you just have to, if you have a little kid, you have to watch a tantrum. It's
right.
not logical what they do.
Yeah.
Like, they throw all their favorite things at the wall
Yeah.
till it
Yeah.
breaks, right? Like, that's
Yeah.
why would one, we videoed it. It was hysterical to watch a kid doing it, because it actually is illogical. And like, frustration and anger, like the voice of those rioting to me is, the voice of the unheard, and the one who wanted attention is never, no one's listening. It's the voice of
Yeah.
that.
And you know what? There's a whole thing, polyvagal theory and how we go into like vagus nerve, longest nerve runs through, controls the the fight, flight, freeze response. And they did a lot of work with this with women who like rape victims. People always say, well, how come you don't scream, or how come you don't fight back or whatever? And no, you can't even access your prefrontal cortex when you are afraid for your life or you feel like you need to fight. You're in your lizard brain and you are not thinking. You are either fighting for your survival, or you are running for your life, or you are freezing like a lizard and hoping the danger will pass. So what you're saying is you're saying a response. I had a response of anger and rage. And not just because of the George Floyd thing. There was 3 incidents right in a row. One of them in my hometown of Louisville, Kentucky, where police burst into a home and killed a young woman in her own home who was an EMT. And these 3 things, and it's like, Black lives don't matter. An ex-police officer, hunting down a young man who's jogging, him and his son, and killing him like an animal, jogging in his own neighborhood. I mean, it's just, and then this whole thing of, filming this man almost 9 minutes being lynched, strangled in the streets, pleading for his life, calling on his mother. Other police officers there are not stopping it. I mean, it's just.
And what's the Toronto stat that you told me? What's the relationship?
You're 20 times more likely to be shot by the police if you are a Black person than if you are a white person in Toronto. What's
your experience of that? I know you haven't been shot, but what's your experience of the police in Toronto?
I don't even know how to process the police anymore. I've got friends who are police, and I respect them and what they do. I've worked with the police in, training in Australia, and I've got police officer friends here in Canada, and it's just really, what's really interesting is that when I grew up, my Uncle Jay was a police officer in Kentucky. And we used to wave at the police officers, and they were there to protect us, and they were from our neighborhood. And so I grew up thinking the police were there to protect you, and they were in your neighborhood and they knew you. And if you were if you're going to get in some trouble with them, they talk you out of it, or, give you a warning, whatever. They were really there to serve the neighborhood. And then something changed. I don't know if they thought there would be corruption or whatever would happen, but people who don't live in your neighborhood come and police you now. They have no connection with you. They don't have any relationship. They didn't grow up and go to school with anybody. They don't have any leverage other than the badge and the gun and the reputation. And so it's interesting because a lot of the police officers that I know are like this throwback. They serve the community. And as a young man, I don't do a lot on Facebook, but I shared this young man in LA named Tillman. I can't remember his first name. And he did a big thing on police officers calling each other out. And this is, I'm really happy to see this. And someone said something about, like 90% of the police, 95% of the police are good, and there's only 5% that are bad guys. It's not the 5%. The system supports the 5%. That's the problem. And now just starting to call it out. Because if you call it out as a police officer, you get blackballed. You go out, you're not gonna get support. You might get friendly fire. You might get shot on by your own people. But now I see police officers standing up and saying, no, we need to police ourselves. And that's what I want to see from police officers. It gives me hope. But because I lived in LA through that whole, through the 80s, at 80, 86, all the way through the 97 is when I spent most of my time there, 85, 86. That whole, Crip blood war thing was happening. That was real. I lived at 43rd and Crenshaw when I first moved there, managed the Fat Burgers, night manager at the Fat Burgers right there down the street. There was neutron between Crips and blood. That was my welcome to LA, fresh from Kentucky. It was wild. And what I learned in LA was the police are not my friend. Number of times I've been pulled over, just on my way home, on my way to lunch. Number of times I saw this young man pulled over back in the 80s, zip tied, hands behind his back, shoes taken off. That was just protocol for running plates back in that day because police officers were getting fired on, gang wars were going crazy. And it was just a time where I learned if the police are behind me, I'm getting pulled over. Or I should be looking in my mirror, or I should be worried about my driving. It's not that feeling I had when I was a kid where it was like, hey, the police are here to protect us. And how you doing, officer? And thank you very much for your service. That's been stuffed down. And it's only the police officers that I know who really serve people, or that little boy in me comes back up and I'm like, oh, wow, thank you for serving the community like your oath says you should, Yeah, so even here in Toronto, my experience is it's just in me now. I see the police and I'm just thinking, I'm gonna get pulled over. Something happened. I was taking my son to the skate park so he could do some scootering with a buddy of his. And something happened in the park across the street, and like 7 or 8 police cars pulled up. And they didn't get out of the cars. It might have been deep in the park. And then one of the cars pulled on the other side of the street where we were and just sit there for a while. And I don't know why. And then my son came up to me and he's like, Dad, those police officers just sitting there. And I think they're staring at you. And I'm like, and I'm trying to ignore them. Like, well, son, that's their problem. We're here at the skate park, we're skating. So let them have their problems. You guys have fun. And he was saying, yeah, I'm afraid for you if they're gonna come over and try to do something to you. And I'm like, just go have fun, man. Whatever their problem is, that's their problem.
But you saw it.
I saw it and I wondered the same thing. I'm like, wow,
Yeah,
why'd you
that's
come
what,
across here?
like, apparently it's even been proven that there's antibodies that just have developed in your body. Your antibodies would be different around that. You're seeing,
Mm.
you remember how back in the day they used to say that about people growing up in Rio? They had like a different kind of readiness
Oh yeah.
because of their experience. That's how I
Yeah.
imagine this,
Yeah.
like a kind of like alertness.
Yeah.
And look, Steve, like I'm very aware that this is an opening of a conversation.
Right.
And with today, I feel like people have this opening to what is like one thing I can do? What's the beginning? How can I, so like, what can I be responsible for? Do you have anything on your mind that we could help people get in this game to shift globally the world that we live in? Meaning, from a humanitarian point of view, that feeling of I'm not okay living in a world where Black lives don't matter. So what can people do?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is just looking at self and just recognizing where our biases are. Where's your bias? And just confront it. Don't try to hide it. Don't be ashamed of it. We all have them. We all have them. So let's take a good look at them and unpack them. Where did they come from anyway? And what's really behind that? Are these people really out to hurt me? Or, what's my personal experience of that? And do I even know any people? Maybe I had some bad experiences and now the whole race is this way. And the same thing that, people say about the police. Oh, it's 95% of the police are good. And it's only 5%. Well, that's every single race. That's every single people. 95% of Black people are good. And just like 95% of white, you know what I mean? It's like, there's so many good people in the world. And the way that Black people have been villainized and stereotyped in the media and movies and all this sort of stuff and the news, it's just, you would think that, oh, we're like the majority of people in the world. And we're a minority. I mean, how many Black people are there in Canada? What's the population? What's the population of Black people in Toronto, yet you're 20 times more likely to be shot?
Mm.
You'd think that this is Atlanta or something, there'd be a huge population of Black people, And so you're seeing Black people all over the place, so the numbers would work out based on population, but they don't. Same with imprisonment and everything else. The numbers don't work out. So there's something going on in systemic. So I think the thing that we can do is just examine ourselves and then look at it and then start to educate and start to unpack and deconstruct our own biases and hate and prejudices and race, whatever's going on in us, and just honor it. Honor where it came from, and then make clear decisions about who you want to be to move forward. And that's going to take some education. It's going to take meeting some people that you don't know, or doing some research about people that you don't know or things that you don't know, and really getting educated. And then the mindset of just really being able to celebrate each other. And this is just a human thing. This is just a human thing. This the same system that supports racism, supports poverty. It supports keeping the political machines operating the way that they operate. It's the idea of keeping a few in power and everyone else in poverty or in conflict and distracted so that the system can perpetuate. And you almost can't blame people who have privilege and power and control things. You almost can't blame them for not giving it up willingly. How many of us give up our privilege and our power willingly? We just don't have as much privilege and power that they do. So there almost has to be something in it for them to want to give it up, or the influencers around them have to do something, whether it's their children or the people that are in their environment. There has to be some sort of win in it for them. Like, it's just in your best interest to have more humanitarian outlook on life instead of control and superiority.
Yeah, because I was going to say, I think there's sort of these blinder coming off around it's a false power. it's an insecure power. That's what control's like, because you can't control everything. There's that moment where you realize it, and sometimes you want to do it more in a fight for it. But ultimately, when you realize that there's something greater, there's a power that's greater than the one you're currently experiencing, I feel like people are really open to that. Like maybe there's something that we don't know. Like we don't know what we don't know. And in a way, it's never been realized yet. And so it's sort of in that unknown territory, this transformation that we're talking about. And so, yeah, I mean, one thing I want to say is like what you just said about being aware of our own biases, which I've been doing more and more of within myself over these last weeks, is I've really noticed that exposure is huge, because in Australia, I'm like, wow, you know, my exposure to people in different races has lessened, you know, and I can see that when I have less exposure, I have more bias. And so I sometimes I think, okay, like for myself, that's my secondary. Once I've established, oh, look at that bias, I go to I say to myself, I don't even know anybody. I don't even know anybody like that. And that has been the opposite, my experience of other things where I don't have bias. And I find it hard to kind of fathom other people's biases in that. And so I think exposure is huge, and really seeking it out, like with a curiosity, like a listening, like anyway, I could go on and on about that, but.
Well, I guess I'm saying about that, because this is absolutely huge. And working with the program here in Canada, there's all sorts of accountability that we go through with government and different stakeholders and everything else. And one of the things that I was challenged with, being the head coach of the Canadian program, was how diverse was my circle of influence into my decision making. So were the majority of the people in the same organization? Were they in the same city? Were they in the same province or country? And so I had to list all of the people who were the major influencers in my decision making, whether they were mentors or staff or consult, whatever it was. And the majority of them were local. So we shared the same experience, the same environment, culture, everything. My decision making wasn't diverse enough, or my influences weren't diverse enough. So I had to start creating people to help influence my decision who weren't in the country, or weren't part of my organization. And it was really interesting just getting that different perspective and how much more creative and innovative our program became, because it wasn't just the same thinking.
That's deep.
You can't change you can't solve the problem with the same thinking that created the problem. It's Einstein, right? So you can't do that. So here I was using the same thinking to try to create different solutions, and it just didn't make any sense. So in your personal life, what's your circle of influence? And the people who help you, who influence your decision making. When you look at racism, it's very difficult to maintain racism when you have a diverse experience.
Yeah.
If you have a very small experience of life and one type of thinking in your environment, then it's very easy to subscribe to whatever's in your environment. So diversity is huge.
I interviewed a woman before protests began in the US, and she created a program called Driving Performance Through Diversity. And her whole thing is about how diversity is an expanded worldview. And what you just said, like, I'm getting that's in the business space. Like, where do your decisions come from? What shapes them? What colors them? And so even if it's not from a business perspective or decision-making process, think about it like the soup that your kids are growing up in. What is that soup? And I think about Jordan's like bestie Zara. She will love that she's getting a mention, but look, they're from a lot of places in the world, but her mom lived a long time in India. And so
Yes.
on a certain day, Zara has her little dot there. And doesn't that then have Jordan wondering about it? There's a whole, she does Bollywood dancing, and her mom is so great in our lives. And that's just one example of diversifying the soup.
Yeah.
And so, you know, from a kid's perspective, if they catch more than they're, you know, it gets caught more than it's taught, then that means that we can actually be deliberate and proactive about the different influences and what surrounds
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a
Okay.
privilege to have access to that diversity, because a lot of people don't. A lot of people stay in the neighborhood they grew up in, or the area they don't move too far away, right? In a lot of places. So that diversity, it's a privilege in a lot of places. In a lot of places, it's a privilege.
Steve,
Yeah.
I've loved you my whole life. Don't listen. Thank you for this conversation. I do feel like it's a beginning. Some of people that know us will laugh because we are known for having much longer than our conversations.
That's right.
This is a breakthrough for us. And I will just say, till the next time, my friend, thank you so much.
Sarah, love to you, Natalie, Jordan, the whole family. You are sunshine. Thank you very much. And thanks for having this conversation. This is, quiet for way too long. And that's one of the things, I know it's time to go. That's one of the things that came out of the march, the Black people afterwards, because we've just been quiet for too long, just making a living, getting through the day, taking care of our families, hoping that things the right thing would happen somehow. And Black people now having a voice and saying, no, I can no longer be quiet and just look at my life. It's about our family trees now. It's about our children and what soup are we creating. Can't keep creating the same soup and hoping. So thank you very much for providing this space and asking me to do this, because I've been quiet for too long and I don't want to be quiet anymore. So thank you.
Well said.